Hello everybody, welcome to this week's episode of the County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. Where in the world are we? That's a question a lot of us ask. It's a question that's been answered by us personally in the last few years with GPS. GPS allows us to see exactly where boundaries are and where we're on a road, but how do you get the information that makes that system accurate? Well, that doesn't come from GPS, it comes from GIS, which is called the Geographical Information System. And this is a very important tool for Utah's counties. Today, that's the topic of our show. So to fill in the blanks for starters on what GIS is, how it came about, and basically how it's applied, here's Cameron Porter.
Have you ever used a map? Of course you have. It may have been a digital or an online map, or it may have been a paper map. But we all use maps all the time. The same is true in government, especially for counties. The county has so many things that need to be mapped that it can be daunting to try to keep track of it all. Thankfully, in the last 20 years or so, technology called GIS, which stands for Geographic Information Systems, has come about to help counties consolidate their map information in a single place.
The redistricting happened in 2012. All the counties had to implement new precincts, and that was all done in GIS. What took weeks for county clerks to do a decade ago, the last redistricting, where they had to assign every voter's address to a new precinct, was pretty much a simple matter of overlaying the new boundaries on top of the registered voter residence locations. And what took weeks took maybe a couple hours.
So how did GIS come about? Well, it's important to know that the term GIS is much like the term word processor. Lots of companies make word processors, and several companies offer GIS software. One of the most prominent companies that offers GIS software is called Esri, or ESRI. Their product? ArcGIS. We were able to catch up with the founder of Esri at the recent National Association of Counties conference in Long Beach, California, and he gave us some amazing insights into how GIS came about.
I started reading about this laboratory at Harvard which did computer mapping. So I wrote there and tried to get into Harvard, finally got in, and got a job at that laboratory at the same time. It was called the Laboratory for Computer Mapping and Spatial Analysis. This was in the mid-60s. So there I learned more about computing, but I also learned about the power of computer-based mapping. So today what GIS is all about is abstracting geography into digital forms.
So let's talk about how GIS is used. After all, GIS software costs money. So is it better overall for counties to use GIS instead of paper maps? Why?
GIS is a fairly new entrant into the public space, the last 20, 30 years. I think that the appreciation for the power of GIS is something that always can use more attention. It's incredibly powerful. It offers lots of opportunities for efficiencies, for savings, and for better outcomes. Yeah, I think that it's kind of, GIS is sort of an untold story.
There's a lot to GIS, and we've only scratched the surface so far. What are some of the more unusual uses for GIS? What do the counties use it for most often? We'll answer these questions and more when we join our guest panel. For the County Seat, I'm Cameron Porter.
As Cameron mentioned, there are layers that you can interject on the Geographical Information System, and those layers become more and more complicated, which means we can do more and more things with great geographical accuracy. That is the topic we will take up with our panel discussion when we come back here on the County Seat.
There is a place where looking out means looking in, where an impression lasting only a few seconds will be imprinted on a life forever, where courage is forged and innocence rediscovered, where remembering is rewarding and forgetting unforgettable. There is a place where truth is felt and where seeing is believing. There is a place.
In a place that is beyond words, there is nothing to be said, except take your time in Bryce Canyon country.
Unlimited opportunity for adventure. It's all about knowing where to look. ATV adventures, rock crawling events, art festivals, and wildlife events. The opportunities are limitless. Pick your adventure in Millard County.
ATV? Check. Four-wheel driving? Check. Bouldering? Check. Mountain biking? Check. Hiking? Check. River rafting? Check. Adventure is about more than just crossing activities off of a list, but hey, if you can find a place that gives you everything you're looking for, all the better. In Emery County, you'll find the San Rafael Swell, trails, lakes, and the small-town hospitality you're looking for. San Rafael Country, in the heart of Utah. Visit us and check something off your list.
Welcome back to the County Seat. We are talking today about Geographical Information Systems. That is the mapping system upon which many things that you rely on is developed. And to join us for that conversation is Patrick Morrow, who is the GIS manager for Utah County, and Chris Merritt, who is he's an archaeologist with the Utah Division of State History. I got that title right.
Yes, you did.
Almost filled up the whole screen there, Chris. Most of us, if we're even familiar that GIS exists, we go into the county recorder's office, or we go into building and planning, and we want to look at a plat map that shows our boundaries, and there's this wonderful picture that's got the boundaries written on it, and they're really relatively or remarkably accurate. But there are a lot of other layers of information that are attached to it, not just maps so we know where our property boundaries are. Could you tell us some of the things that or layers that you have incorporated into GIS?
Well, Utah County, we've employed GIS technology since the early 80s, really went at the outset of its origins. We did it as a result of needing to develop a better way to catalog and model land values for tax purposes. It's a complicated thing. I mean, now Utah County has over 200,000 parcels, about 206,000 parcels. It's a lot of things to catalog, and it's not just property lines. I mean, if you can think about anything that its location matters, almost all of that we have layers for. Everything from zoning to elevation contour lines to all kinds of hazards, flood zones, earthquakes, everything. It's actually quite extensive. So people might think in terms of this, usually that property interface is a county level or a municipal level thing. It's just on our day-to-day lives. We drive on the streets. We don't think about the sewer pipes under it. We don't think about utility lines, easements, right-of-ways, things like that. We just go where we go. But you would think a county would be involved in it. What is surprising to me is how important it is for other areas, which is why we invited you here today, Chris, to explain how the state, particularly the Division of History, incorporates and relies on GIS. So what kind of things do you do with it?
Well, state history, it's critical to our workflow. GIS is the way we track our systems. It tracks our sites that we have on the landscape. So one of the jobs of state history is to collect all the information on historic buildings, something over 50 years old, but also all the archaeological sites. We also maintain a database of cemeteries, markers, and monuments, anything that has historic or archaeological value for the state of Utah.
When are you coming by my house? It's over 50.
You might be over 50, but we don't have you in the database. But archaeology and history is everywhere. And so for a long time, it was all done on paper maps using folks that were wandering around with compasses, putting dots on topo maps, and then it would be sent to our office. In the 2000s, we're like, that's really inaccurate. And so we digitized everything into this geoinformational system, geospatial system. And now it gives us sub-meter accuracy of where these archaeological sites are and where historic buildings are. And that's really critical when we start talking about oil and gas development in the Uinta Basin. And these oil and gas companies want to be able to put their drill pad in, but they don't want to damage a site. And so we can say, the site's right here, move your pad 10 feet, you're good. That accuracy never existed before the invention of GIS. And so for us, it's critical. And for an archaeologist, I love archaeology, but we live in a world where development has to occur. But this tool gives us an effective way to do it by balancing the resources. And it's critical for the state and our county partners and our city partners who partner through GIS and AGRC to get that data that we host.
Well, this raises a whole raft of questions, and one of them is a historical question about the implementation of GIS, and we will continue that when we come back with the county seat. We're talking today about Geographical Information Systems, GIS, and we will continue our conversation when we come back in just a minute.
When the road takes you farther than you knew possible, when the world is more beautiful than you've ever seen, when home is more comfortable than it should be, this is when you know you're in Kane County. The perfect mix of rural and urban, culture and adventure. Glendale, Orderville, Kanab, Bigwater, small towns with more to offer than just peace and quiet. Kane County, Utah. Find the new you.
There's a little place on a Utah map where I was raised, where my heart's at, where the sagebrush grows wild and high, and the stars come out at night. Oh, there ain't nothing like being raised in the basin with a Ute reservation, skiing starvation, that Duchesne County life.
What do you picture when you hear Rich County, Utah? Bear Lake adventure, snowmobile action, pristine skiing, spectacular solitude. Well, if that isn't what first came to mind, then you just don't know Rich County. The Bear Lake Monster Polar Plunge, snowmobiling Monte Cristo, ice fishing Bear Lake, skiing the backcountry, fishing at the Cisco Disco. Come and find out what you never knew you were missing. Rich County, Utah. The weekends just never feel like they're long enough. By the time you get to a destination, you're worn out and you may need a vacation to recover from your last vacation. The solution is closer than you think, and that's just what you need. You can find the desert at Little Sahara, the cool refreshment of Yuba Lake, escape to the green of the forest on the Nebo Loop. Make your escape to Juab County. It'll change your family forever.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking today about Geographical Information Systems, GIS. You brought up a point of how much the technology has changed, but a lot of the field work that's been done up to that point was done in a universe that wasn't accurate. So what kind of challenges does that present?
Well, I think one of the main things it does is we have to keep in mind when something was captured and how it was captured. We have a lot of ways. We don't just capture GIS information through GPS, but let's just talk about GPS. GPS has changed radically over the last 20 years, and there's more satellites up there. The technology is better. It's more accessible. Everybody's cell phone has it now. So, you know, stuff we were able to capture back even 10 years ago, it was more expensive to capture high accuracy data then than it is now. So you had to use it when it made sense. Now it's easier to get it, but all of our data sets in Utah County, most of them, you know, have a history that goes well beyond 10 years. So we need to sort of keep that in mind when we're comparing one layer against another. Let's say it's a property line on an aerial photo. Both those things have relative accuracy. And so you need to keep that in mind. It might not be actually where it would line up if you had a surveyor come out and survey your property.
What is your system for dealing with that?
Well, the technical term that we use in the industry is called fuzzy tolerance. And what fuzzy tolerance is the understanding that things aren't 100% accurate, that there is a certain fuzzy tolerance to it. we try to nail that down mathematically so that we keep that in mind, but it's still complicated when you're throwing lots of stuff on top of other stuff.
So Chris, how do you account for that kind of an impact in your work?
So a lot of times these old surveys, we have surveys going back to the 1930s, and when they were going down the Green River or the Colorado River, and we put a dot on the map and hope. And so the best thing that we hope to do is get resurvey, send people back out and try to relocate the sites. A lot of our records have verbal descriptions, like, oh, from this point you go this way. And so we try to use that, relocate the site, and then map it using the most accurate technology we have, GPS. Every field archaeologist, we have about 500 practicing archaeologists in Utah. And some work for agencies, some work for private industry. But universally, they're all using various levels of GPS technology with various levels of accuracy. And so we try to push for the highest accuracy possible because that's what people need when they're planning projects, when they're doing vegetation treatments or pipeline development. And so for us, the old data, what we call the legacy data, is to go back, revisit, clean it up as best as possible. That becomes a problem when the verbal descriptions, like turn a left at Mr. McGillicuddy's farm, and 30 years later, that farm's no longer there. So you just kind of guess and you hope for the best.
So has that like literally impacted things before because somebody thinks they can or can't build and the information's a few miles? Can it be as much as a few miles?
It could be a few miles out. We're doing a lot of data cleanup in some of the larger counties like San Juan. And, folks, after a full field day in 100-degree heat, they don't put dots on the map where they're supposed to. And so suddenly a road that was supposed to avoid a site went through a site because the road commission was told don't go here. So they went there and they damaged the site in the meantime. They're not held accountable for that. But yeah, better data equals better decisions. And so that's our job, is to try to promote that statewide at State History.
Do you budget for that? I mean, I know you have an ongoing flow of new work, but are you trying to say, okay, well, we're going to dedicate a portion of this stuff to making the old stuff more accurate, or?
Yeah, probably the hardest part at State History is we don't really have a field component. We're relying on state and federal agencies feeding us information through the contractor world. And so what we try to do is we push for standards. Like if an area hasn't been surveyed in 10 years or the site documentation's over 10 years old and it's in your project area, go back, revisit it, get it more accurate so we can better understand what we have and don't have in the system. And so it's an ongoing world. And when we have a little over 100,000 known sites in Utah and we've surveyed about 9% of the land base, there's a lot of stuff we don't know. Because in archaeology, we're talking Paleo-Indian sites, 13,000 years old, to 1965 Cold War era sites, because it's a 50-year rule is what we roll by. And so every year there's new things created and the old stuff gets older. And so revisiting these things and promoting academic research and agency compliance is really the only way we're improving that data set.
Do you attach to that historical location descriptive information about what the asset is that you're,
Yeah, we collect about 15 core fields, and we have for a little over 40 years. And so now that's being transferred into the GIS. So now the BLM, actually, they use us as their central repository for archaeological data. They rely on the state to give it back to them.
Well, that's a switch.
Yeah. And so for that, we collect what kind of site is it? Prehistoric, historic, site type. Is it significant or not? A lot of folks have this conception that every archaeological site is significant or important. In reality, about 40% are. We use an internal professional rubric to decide, and that's critical information for the oil and gas company or the land manager to know if something's important or not. And so we track as many of those data fields as we can. And right now at State History, we're doing a major reconstruction of our database to even make it more powerful. And so land managers dealing with sage grouse can take information on where sensitive sites are, because sometimes 5,000 years ago, humans were mapping onto vegetation that was really good for sage grouse. And now it's disappeared.
Patrick, how many layers of information would you guess Utah County subscribes to with Esri?
Well, it comes in from different sources, but the layers that we develop, that we maintain, that we had stewardship over are well into the hundreds. We track personally more than 1 million different items of information. And that's partly because GIS has become so enveloped in the business practices throughout all areas of county government. I mean, everyone from the county assessor, you mentioned the county recorder's office, the sheriff's office, engineering, planning and development, the health department, elections. You can hardly find a department that doesn't use GIS for one thing or another, and usually it ends up being one of their core duties. So I couldn't even tell you the actual number, even though I'm in charge of them. There's so many that there are a lot. And then we also use data sets from the state or from other locals, municipalities, and then there are some sort of public domain ones that we get as well. But the ones I worry about are the ones that we maintain.
Okay, you've got all this ingest of information to build this countywide database or the statewide database. Who from the outside taps it to? I mean, like, does Google use your stuff to make their maps work?
That's a good question. Back in the day, we would know because they would send us contracts and say, hey, would you sign off on us using them? Nowadays, they don't really. The international laws changed a little bit, but we do know they do. There are agencies, there's companies that Google uses to collect this information. We see changes that we make on our base maps, building footprints and road changes that miraculously just appear on a Google map shortly after.
See, like I extended my garage, and now the little outline of my house on Google shows that my garage is extended, so I know it works.
Most likely, if you live in Utah County, it was touched by one of my staff first, and then Google gathered it up. As far as we know, that's what happens. It seems to.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break here on the County Seat. We'll come back for our final segment in just a minute.
149 million years in the making, dinosaurs once roamed this land. Now they're found at the Dinosaur National Monument. Let's take you beyond the bones. We call it Dinosaur Land. You'll find it offers adventures and sights not seen anywhere else in the world. Come to Dinosaur Land, Vernal, Utah. You'll want to stay forever. The dinosaurs did.
What would you do with an extra day in Utah Valley? Explore the Wasatch Mountains? Snap a family photo at Bridal Veil Falls. Cool off on Utah Lake or the Provo River. No matter what you're searching for, you can find it in Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.
Beautiful scene, isn't it? The great wide spaces of the wild, wild West. Hi, I'm Chad Booth, host of At Your Leisure. I'm asking you to support the Blue Ribbon Coalition. Their efforts responsibly preserve access to our public lands. If it were not for the Blue Ribbon Coalition and their efforts, you may not have access to millions of acres of land across the West. This is America's playground, and if we don't do anything, we are going to lose it. Join, participate, and donate.
Have you ever wanted to recreate the world around you? Add some excitement, culture, adventure? Well, there's no need to remake the world when that perfect combination already exists. Just remember 4 words. Welcome to Weber County. In Ogden, you'll find everything you're looking for, from the top of Powder Mountain to the restaurants of our revitalized downtown. Ogden, Utah, mountain to metro and everything in between. Visit ogden.com.
Welcome back to the County Seat. We are talking today about GIS. You know, this has just been a conversation that has just been one enlightenment after another. Actually, it extends right back to the time we started the story with the interviews for this episode. It was like, I never knew, I had no idea, and I just keep getting that kind of a, you know, just an overwhelmed thought about it. So I guess my question is, what is the one takeaway our audience should have about how much GIS has changed the way we relate to the land we live on?
So I'll go first. I think the biggest thing to me is this idea of big data and stories. Big data is sort of this new term being thrown around of taking all this disparate information, archaeological sites, vegetation, all that, and being able to tell a story. Humans are visual. You can write it down a lot of things, but if you can make it into a pretty story, They eat it up more. It's more understandable. It's more relatable. And so in history, being able to convey visually changing patterns, changing where people came and where settlements arise, and being able to tell that story through GIS and through this spatial distribution is really powerful. And Esri and ArcGIS has actually created a series of story map templates that people can now tell a story using mapping. And so one of the ones that we completed was looking at the areas of National Historic Landmarks in Utah. We have 14. But talking about what ones were first designated, Temple Square, Fort Douglas, and then how history changed, how we looked back at the past and how we recognized different things for their contribution to Utah history. And we added Topaz, Mountain Meadows Massacre Site. And to be able to walk people through with these locations that people know the story of Mountain Meadows Massacre, but they know where it is, how it relates to the settlements around it, where Topaz is, and imagining those Japanese internees arriving from California and being thrown out way out west of Delta. And being able to visually present that and present history in an interesting way is really powerful to me because it makes my job more interesting.
From your standpoint, as the guy that's got to do it on a nuts and bolt basis.
Well, I'd like to echo with what Chris said. I think the big picture of GIS is that it's not a CAD system that's just the lines. It's not a database full of tables, but it's the power of putting them together. It's the power that, as Chris kind of pointed out, we can not only tell you where something is, but why it's there, or how it's affected or effectiveness is impacted by where it is in relation to the things around it. We're doing things now that I wouldn't have really thought about a few years ago with mosquito abatement, with all the first West Nile and now the Zika virus stuff, where on one hand, we're cataloging where things are, where these mosquito spots are. But on the other hand, once we've done that, we can have a real-time view of what those treatments are and a real-time view of where things are popping up, like these epidemics, and how we can better treat for that. The real answer in the end is it's one thing to know where something is. It's another thing to be able to evaluate how you're interacting with your environment so that you can be most effective. And we both work in government, which means we both work on very little budgets. So every time we can become more efficient through analytics and through technology, we're going to want to do that because neither of us are adding staff. I haven't added staff in years, but yet we're doing a lot more work.
Interesting. Well, this is very fascinating. I invite you to go download some stuff from Utah County and take a look at their data. We thank you for joining us for the County Seat each week. This is the show that's about local government, about where you live your life. It's to your daily life the most important government that you interact with. So we invite you to learn more. Join us each week on the show. Be engaged, be part of the solution, and we'll look for you next week on the County Seat. Thank you. If you'd like to share this video with your friends, well, you do that right here. If you would like to subscribe to our YouTube channel, you do that over here. If you'd like to interact with us on the County Seat, that happens over here. If you want to watch the next episode of the County Seat, you can catch it Saturday night at 11 or Sunday morning at 8:30 on ABC4 Good for Utah.